some voter fraud that was going on in Palm Beach, as well as one other county. But I was involved in that, so I've got some experience in this. I also was involved in the recount. I was an observer in Fulton County, Georgia, on the initial recount of the election, of the presidential election. And I want to kind of give you some background on that and give you some my personal experience of what I actually experienced. I have not come forward. I have not said this publicly because I was waiting for some lawsuits, etc., to be filed, which they have on this case. So now I'm going to go public, and I'm going to give you my firsthand observation of what I personally saw that happened in Fulton County. This is on the initial recount, not on the second one that is supposed to have finished up real recently. This is on the first recount I was involved in. I heard one of the things that got me really, really motivated to do a video was this, that our Attorney General, Bill Barr, came out and he said this: there's no evidence of widespread election fraud. And when he said that, I felt even more compelled to come out and give my firsthand account of what happened in Fulton County, just on the recount alone in Fulton County. First of all, I just kind of want to give you some background of how that recount happened. It was actually held in the World Congress Center there in Atlanta, Georgia. There were somewhere near 170 tables in this World Congress Center. It was inside. It was about the size of a football field. Again, I'm estimating that, but that was pretty much the case. Within that, there was tables, 170 tables. Within those 170 tables, there were two counters. One would actually count the ballot, whether it be for, in this case, whether it be for Trump or Biden, and then the second counter was supposed to verify what the first counter called out, and they were putting them in piles. After they put them in piles, they were counting them and verifying it per batch, is the way that they were doing that. So there were roughly 340 counters within that arena. The Republican Party was allowed to have a total of 10 observers within that entire building. They were allowed to have 10 observers on the floor at any given time to observe. So you've got 10 observers observing 340 counters, 170 tables, about the size of a football field. So I just want to give you kind of a reference of what the task was as an observer, what we were to do. I'm going to just give you, there's a lot of discussions, there's a lot of subpoenas, there's a lot of things going on that are verifying voter fraud and election fraud throughout the state of Georgia. But I'm going to tell you my firsthand account of what I personally saw, experienced, and investigated during just that recount. Now, many times when you're doing a recount, you could perhaps do a recount on fraudulent ballots. You really wouldn't know that. You're just counting ballots that could have been submitted as fraudulent ballots to begin with. But again, I'm going to give you my firsthand account of that. First of all, one of the things that drew one of the largest the biggest attention to me was most of the counters, they were Democratic counters. Again, this is Fulton County, Atlanta. That's pretty much understandable. But the problem is a lot of them were not able to keep an unbiased perspective on these recounts. In fact, many of them, in my opinion, were very, very not just biased, but they would get to the point of they would get very militant acting in the process. In fact, some of them would, we were allowed to observe them. We were allowed to get, we were not allowed to really get close enough to really see the ballots as such and see the actual names on the ballots. If we did, they would ask us to move away. Some of the directors would ask us to move away. But a lot of them, like on the batch numbers and whatever, they would actually turn over the batch numbers to keep us from knowing what precinct some of these ballots were coming from. And we did report that. They asked them not to do that, but they continued doing it. Even to the point of the director of Fulton County. His name was Richard Barron. Very, very militant acting when I had a particular issue that we were pulling up, that we were addressing with him. He actually got in my face. And I mean, got in my face like he was wanting to be confrontational. And it was that kind of thing that again, all that does is draw additional alarms to what's going on. One of the things that I personally witnessed that was of the greatest issue of election fraud that I saw was this. On one of the tables, they were counting, there was somewhere in the neighborhood of around 3,000, 3,500 ballots that were piled up for Biden. And as I was observing those, what we observed, and it was actually verified through an affidavit by the actual counters, which actually said that, hey, there's a problem, something's wrong with these ballots. She pointed out, one of the ladies pointed out when I was walking by, again, we're not allowed to talk to these people, but she brought up the conversation. This is what she said. She said, I want you to take a look at this pile of ballots. These ballots are all the same. The paperweight on these ballots, the paper is a different texture of paper on these ballots. And she said, I want you to look at the bubble marks. Now, these ballots are absentee ballots. The absentee ballots are a longer type of ballot. And an absentee ballot is where somebody would bubble in who they're voting for. They would fold that ballot up because it had to be mailed out. They would fold that ballot up, put it in an envelope, sign it, and they would send it in or drop it off to the supervisor of elections or to a drop place that they had pre-assigned. On those ballots, they were a different type of paper. They were not the same type of paper that the other absentee ballots were, they would normally have. Many of these ballots, I noticed, were not folded. There were no creases in them. So how did they get an absentee ballot from a mailbox, fill it out, and send it back without it being folded? That was another big question. In addition to that, every single one of the bubbles were identical. They were absolutely identical. In fact, it was, I concluded very quickly and without doubt that these ballots had been copied. They had been Xeroxed off by a copy machine, and they had been pumped out and had been put in for voting. So, and again, that was around 3,000, 3,500 ballots I personally saw. So if you realize that just in one particular area, one particular precinct that I personally saw that many, I am sure that there were many, many more. Again, understand that out of all this count, just in Fulton County, out of thousands and thousands of ballots, out of 340 counters, out of 170 tables, only 10 of us were able to witness what was going on. That's one thing that we particularly that we saw, and in having a discussion, some of the officials immediately came over to that table, warned us that they would have us removed if we continued talking to them. They didn't know exactly what we were talking about, but again, it drew a great amount of attention that these were fraudulent ballots. There's no doubt in my mind they were fraudulent. There's nobody that can perfectly bubble in a ballot 3,000 times, different people, without them having been copied off. A little bit later, I went to, there was a representative from the Secretary of State that was there that was to be one of the observers. And I went to him a little bit later because, again, I didn't want to draw attention to that because it's amazing how things like that disappear when you bring them up or you address them. So none of us wanted to do that. So later on, I just asked him, I said, let me ask you a question. I'm just curious. Tell me about your absentee ballot process. What do you do? How do you, in fact, let's start from all the way to the beginning. Where do you like order these ballots, or where do they come from? He said, no, we order them from a place, and he told me about the place out in the West that all these ballots come from. And they have been they were ordered by the Secretary of State, authorized by the Secretary of State. They had to have a particular weight of paper, a lot of things, and they were approved and officially designated by the Secretary of State. So what that told me is that if there's a different weight of paper on a different ballot, that would raise great concern that those ballots are not, those are fraudulent ballots, quite frankly. So he verified that without really knowing the details. There was another particular issue, and a lot of press has talked about this. I say press, meaning the mainstream media won't talk about this, but during the count on election night, there had been a water main leak, and that had been brought up that there was a water main leak, and they had to shut down. The area where that they were voting, or I'm sorry, where they were counting the votes. And this was actually across the street from where the recount has happened, and it was the comment was made that there was a water main leak. Well, I actually ran down the repair person that was responsible for repairing that leak to find out how significant that leak was, what kind of leak it was, if it was a water main. And this is what he told me. He said, no. He said that was not a water main leak. He said it was a leak. He said the amount of water that that was actually leaked out onto the floor may have been a gallon of water. So he basically told me that there was no reason for them to shut down the facility. There was no reason that they asked everybody to leave, including the observers. There was no reason for that. It was not significant in any way, shape, or form. And so my question is, why would you shut down an entire arena, ask everybody to leave over a leak that took probably he told me about 30 minutes to repair? Again, it wasn't of any nature that was going to flood anything. Why would you do that? And then why would thousands and thousands of Biden votes show up at some period of time when all this building and everybody's gone, supposedly gone, which they weren't, because obviously they were continuing to count ballots, because if they had not, the count would have picked up when the building opened again. Again, it's clearly something that was going on between that point and the time that the building was opened back up. And by me telling you from a first-hand viewpoint that that ballots had been copied, there's no question about that. That is in the lawsuit in Georgia. So we'll see how that comes out. But again, my personal, what I personally saw as an eyewitness was that particular issue in that case. So when Barr comes out and makes a comment that there's no widespread, define widespread. Is there enough voter fraud and election fraud in the state of Georgia overturn the Biden vote? Absolutely. When I personally saw that many ballots, yes, there's without a doubt there's enough ballots there that would overturn that. So I'm not sure where he's saying that. I'm not sure where he's getting at. I'm not sure if he is bailing on his responsibility as an attorney general. I don't know what the case is, but that is mine. I just wanted to kind of share that, let y'all know that That is my perspective, my eyewitness. That's what I saw for a fact that was going on in Georgia, actually in Fulton County, Georgia. Thank you. Keep praying. Keep contacting your legislators, especially in the state of Florida and some of these other states, and push them for investigations on things of this nature. Thank y'all. And